Okay, it's post-lunch. Hopefully you had a cookie to get some energy. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to bring energy and passion to the concept of metrics. So be prepared. A couple things real quick. I hate doing presentations that are a monologue. I like a dialogue. So I'm going to switch it up as I show some slides and share some concepts. If you've got a question, raise your hand. I'll move pretty quick because we do have a lot of data I'm going to provide, but if you have a question, it probably means at least a couple other people have the same question. So is that okay, guys? Yeah. Okay. So what do you see here? Do you see a brief history? You see the agenda, right? Yeah. Okay. So why are you going to give me 30 minutes and listen to me? Who in the hell is this guy? I think the most important thing is out of undergrad, I went to work for a division of GE. We were the world's largest provider of time sharing. And for those of you who aren't nearly as old as me, time sharing was hosted applications with a multi-tenant architecture on a mainframe, accessible via our global private network, sold as a minimum subscription plus usage basis. Sound familiar? And we had companies like Apple. Apple paid us $20 million a year to run their entire distributor network, and they paid us $10 million. 1 year, the usage was so high because they were growing, it was 20 million. Guess what happened? The CFO called us and said, what the hell? I budgeted 10, right? They went away. They went away in the next 12 months because of that. So I have a lot of history and scars around usage-based pricing that I think will help inform us how we move forward. Okay, so I'm going to talk real quick about a brief history of SaaS pricing. You're going to know it, but there's some reason for that from a contextual basis. Then I'm going to move to some recent data that we did with our benchmarking. We benchmarked over 18,000 B2B SaaS companies over the last 2+ years, 1 million data points, so this comes from real data. Then we're going to talk a little bit about ARR. How many people in this room work at all on SaaS metrics and things like annual recurring revenue? Anyone? Okay, man, is your job going to get even harder over the next few years? Okay, and then we're going to talk a little bit about I'm working with people including David Spitz. David Spitz was the creator of the KeyBank Capital Markets, Kyle Poyer from OpenView, CJ Gustafson, Ben Murray, the SaaS CFO. We are redefining some of these SaaS metrics in the age of variable pricing models and variable revenue. SaaS Metrics Standards Board is an organization that I founded, and we're going to be publishing those standards. So if you want to know how other companies are looking at some of these metrics, you can go to SaaS Metrics Standards Board and see that. Okay. So brief history of SaaS pricing. So a lot of people, are thinking about, oh my God, ARR, annual recurring revenue, is going to get totally screwed up with this new model. Well, when SaaS first started, we really didn't have the concept of annual recurring revenue. We started with monthly recurring revenue. Salesforce, when they, and Concur, the two people who started this, they sold to SMBs, right? They had month-to-month contracts. So they took that monthly revenue, monthly recurring revenue, multiplied it by 12, and that's how they got annual recurring revenue. But it was never promised to renew or recur. That was the hope of the promise, but it wasn't the promise initially. Then we went to a per user on an annual basis. Why? Because when SaaS companies started selling to the enterprise, enterprises were a little frustrated with getting monthly invoices because of the processing costs, et cetera. So they said, why don't we just go to an annual contract, we'll get some discounts, and I process an invoice once a year versus every month. Because they were used to perpetual license software, where they paid once upon contract, and they paid once per year on the annual maintenance, right? They weren't processing bills every month. Then we went to, on the enterprise companies, per year on a multi-year basis. Hey, I'm going to sign a 3-year contract, and as long as the discount rate for that multi-year agreement was less than your churn rate, so if you had an annual churn rate of 15% and you gave a 12% discount for a 3-year agreement, you were better off, right? Just from a statistical probability perspective. Then we started doing more usage basis in 2019, and now we're seeing more of the outcome-based or value-based. You saw this in previous presentations, so I'm not going to bore you with it. Let me see if I can make this move. Now, what's interesting, we're not going to spend a lot of time here on usage-based mechanisms because you've already had a lot of that, but AI is different already. And the reason AI is different already is you have kind of 3 primary types of pricing that native AI companies are using or SaaS companies adding AI, and you heard them. But one is prediction. I think we're going to deflect so many calls, or we're going to close this many cases without human intervention, right? So that's going to be a price that's based upon prediction. You're going to have some personal productivity. Things like, okay, if I can actually automate 40% of level 1 inbound support calls, what's that worth to me? Do I decrease my headcount by 30%? So you're going to see more personal productivity, and then you're going to see real performance-based pricing. Things like, I can actually defer hiring these 8 people. So there's some performance improvements I'm going to get right up front. So I'm going to keep moving quickly. Pricing philosophy. So we did about 3,500 companies we researched that have an AI capability, and we were looking at what the pricing philosophy was. By the way, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, at the Benchmarkit.ai site, there's something called SaaS Metrics Palooza. It's an event we put on every year, about 3,000 people attend. But Battery Ventures just presented what's going on with pricing in a very detailed way. So it's something you can look at. But one is, I just want to have a different edition, so I monetize via edition. I have my AI-enabled edition. Maybe that's an additional $30 per user, which is one model I just saw. We have it's a brand new product. You're already using our call center product, but this is going to be our automated agent product. So you pay us X dollars for that as an upsell to your existing product. And then the third is the capture through real outcome base. Oh, my AI SDR just generated 20 meetings for you last week. Pay me per meeting. So it's truly outcome based. The key about this pricing model, it's got to be outcomes that you measure within your platform versus counting on the customer to provide you the outcome. Because we tried that 30 years ago, and the biggest issue, even with open APIs, is will they really integrate and send you the success-based outcomes that they're generating in their company? More importantly, after a year or two, they're going to start saying, well, I've already got a lot of the benefit. Now, this is my baseline, which is 30% better than it was before you, so I just want to pay you on the incremental improvement. So there's some real challenges with the outcome-based model. Okay, I believe it was the previous speaker who said, no, it was Adam, 60% of SaaS companies are using some level of usage-based pricing. The most recent research, and we're launching another version of that next week in partnership with Logisense and Maxio, 52% of B2B SaaS companies, the end here was about 1,000, were already using some level of usage-based pricing. Another 12% were going to be launching usage-based pricing in 2024. So if you add those two up, it's what, 63%, so very close to what Adam was talking. 15% were not evaluating it. So, this is not something you're going to take back to your company and say, this is new information, I'm going to be able to do something different, but it's just confirming this is the wave of the future, and anyone in here is responsible for finance reporting. It's going to make your jobs even harder. This is interesting that we found, and we're going to try to confirm it in this next survey, but what's the number of pricing variables being used in usage-based pricing? So you think simplification, right? But only 35% had a single variable. Let's say that's an API call, right? Another 31% were using 2 usage variables. Maybe it was number of systems integrated to and number of API calls. But as your pricing team and your marketing team is coming up with their great pricing constructs, right? And they're like, well, there's value here and there's value here. It makes it much more difficult, not only to implement, to bill, but customer satisfaction in the invoice and reporting they get, because sometimes it'll need to be reported across different cost centers. Well, that API call in that system, finance is going to pay for that, but for this API call, that's going to be a supply chain thing. So you got to think about when you're billing using usage-based pricing, how is that information going to be used to both approve the payment and then allocate to their different internal budgets, if that makes sense. I'm not going to bore you here. Now, this is something a lot of first-time usage-based billing companies don't really think about. They think about, I'm going to reduce their friction for my customer acquisition process. If I don't have a huge contract up front, maybe we can get them to get it implemented, start testing it, and then there's going to be some viral expansion, right? Usage-based pricing, I'm going to show you next what happened in 22, 23, and 24 for companies using usage-based versus fixed billing subscription. During any market downturn, seasonality, or a vertical industry retrenchment, think about mortgages. Think about a company that was billing for usage for mortgages in 2024 versus 2021, right? That expansion revenue, that NRR went down like this. So what we see and what you, wow, someone's trying to rain on my parade. Okay, so, and I'm going to give you a new metric, and once again I said, something that you can take back to your company. You're going to need to get a hell of a lot better at forecasting product usage in a variable pricing model. Because no longer can you say, oh, I have remaining performance obligation of 20 million or deferred revenue of 17 million, if these terms make any sense to you. It's going to be by cohort of customer, and maybe that's enterprise versus SMB, or financial service industry versus automotive industry versus this industry. You're going to need to be able to forecast product utilization trends, translate that into your variable billing for usage base, and provide guidance. And it may sound easy at this level, it's freaking hard. In fact, here's a new metric. You can write it down and think about it. APR, annual projected revenue. Somebody in your company is going to have to get really good at saying, for this cohort of customers that did 21 million this year in usage-based pricing billing, here's what they're going to do for the next 12 months. And it's going to become even more important as you grow than forecasting new customer acquisition. Think about that. New customer acquisition, the error of margin on accuracy is about plus minus 13%. That's across about 800 companies we surveyed. So just think about how this usage-based pricing model is going to challenge your FP&A and your finance folks. How do you set commissions, right? If a sales rep had a group of accounts that did 10 million last year, what's their quota for next year? Well, back in the day when I actually had a sales team in this, we'd say, okay, that company is going to grow by 20% based upon their usage trends and the macroeconomic factors. The automotive industry is growing 10% next year from a unit sales, and that's how we price. So something to think about. Is this helpful to think? Okay, now, this information is from Maxio. We partner with Maxio. They have about 2,000 customers on their SaaS metrics and billing platform. So they have real access to the data. And what this shows you is the growth rate trends. The blue line was usage-based trending from Q1 22. This is the median. It's the median. And the yellow is fixed rate pricing, subscription per user. So what you notice here is once the industry downturn started to happen, and it really was Q1 22, though a lot of us didn't feel it until Q3 21. See how the growth rate went down so much faster? So that's real life data from about 1,584 companies that kind of shows the concern I have about usage-based pricing when you have a downturn or macroeconomic things out of your control. At the same time, look at subscription billing. It came down, but it remained pretty flat. Why? Well, if they had a contract that was still in force for 9 months or 18 months, or if they had a 3-year contract, it was still in force for 30 months when the downturn happened, they didn't get hit as much, right? So that's one data point. When market turndowns happen, be prepared for slower growth rates. Now this data, it shows you on the left-hand side for sub 1 million, probably not a lot of sub 1 million businesses here, but what's interesting is when you're first trying to get product market fit and convince potential investors there's money behind getting product market fit, you notice how the subscription or fixed price is higher. Why? Because you don't need to worry about getting it implemented, getting it reused, right? And get the transactions to increase whatever your variable is. But after 1 million, you'll see that variable pricing, usage-based pricing, companies grow faster. So anybody, by the way, who wants any of these reports, any of this data, The presentation will be available. Just send me an email at ray@benchmarkit.ai, and I'm happy to provide you any of these reports that are the source documents for this. So the takeaway from this is usage-based pricing will allow you to grow faster once you have established some level of product market fit for that product. The additional challenge beyond all the billing that you've heard about today is the forecasting. So if your product management team comes up with that new AI product and says, here's the value-based outcome, it's going to be wonderful, first thing you need to think about, how do I forecast how much revenue this is going to bring? And then how do I track that after we start seeing it? Okay, so as the founding member of the SaaS Metrics Standards Board, we publish standards for all the metrics you've heard of, starting with CARR, contracted ARR, and ARR. And Sunny down here, who's on this head of finance at LogicSense, has been working with us for a couple years on these, so thank you for being a follower. But we love ARR. Why? Because investors love ARR. Because it was predictable. It's like, oh, I've got $50 million of ARR on the books. I've got $43 million of deferred revenue. You knew what was going to happen at least for the next 12 months, if not for the next 24 months, for the most part. So investors loved it. Even in a usage-based model, you can still get contracted minimums. So it's your go-to-market strategy. It's going to determine that. But from what we've seen, the sooner you can have a sales team motivated to try to get some level of minimum, it's going to be helpful to you from a growth perspective. And here's the other thing, and I was telling the story at lunch. The biggest issue when I was in the usage-based economy and had $500 million, almost $800 at the end of P&L responsibility, if you had revenue that went up much higher than the forecast from the buyer's perspective, that account immediately became at risk. So two things happened. Either they didn't tell us how pissed off they were, and they looked for alternatives, right? Or they tell our sales team is like, well, I get paid on growth, and if you're spending $20 million and you want to pay me $12 million, why in the hell would I do that right away, right? Well, the answer is because you don't want them to churn, right? But you really got to kind of think about getting contractual minimums, but how you incent it and how important that is to your buyer. Your buyer might even pay a premium for certainty. So you may not have to give a per unit discount if you can give them certainty and predictability. And that's not how a salesperson automatically is going to think, right? So when you think about ARR, one of the topics that's going to come up is, should I split the baby? And by the way, I have to give credit to Dave Kellogg. Anybody know Dave Kellogg? Okay. So Dave is like one of the OGs of SaaS Metrics. He's also my partner on the SaaS Talk podcast. This is his. He's like, you are going to probably think about splitting the baby. You're going to have your commitment, your committed ARR, and you're going to have your usage base. If you follow Kyle Poyer or CJ Gustafson, mostly metrics, they'll talk about reoccurring revenue. So you might want to think about, do we from a finance perspective start measuring and reporting both the contracted and the variable, and even think about that on your income statement, that you have subscription and you have variable. Why? Because investors are going to be much more comfortable if they think you're going to have that variable ARR reported and you're tracking it and you can forecast it. Okay. One of the debates that Dave and I have had is splitting this into committed or subscription ARR and variable ARR. That's going to be really helpful to your investors. But if you get close to coming public, do you think Snowflake exposes in their revenue how much of it is contracted and how much of it is variable? No effing way, right? So it's really good to help you with operational decisions to know how much is at risk next year and maybe how much resource you allocate, customer success, et cetera, to that variable component, because your customer success cost, median in the B2B tech business today is 6% of revenue gets consumed by customer success. When you go to a variable model, you're going to need to start thinking about, do I need to have incremental customer success resources for the ramping and for the retain? My estimate's going to go up to 8 to 9%. Where does that come from? Where does that extra cost come from, right? So something to think about. Another thing is a lot of us who haven't been around for a long time, right? Annual recurring revenue was never meant recurring. And you're like looking at me saying, well, wait, it says annual recurring revenue. The most common calculation formula for ARR, not contracted ARR, but ARR, is MRR, monthly recurring revenue, times 12. Right? So, and even companies that today have monthly contracts or have 50% more of their revenue is variable, it's usage-based, they still do MRR times 12. Or maybe they'll do quarterly recurring revenue times 4. In fact, I don't have it here, but if you look at public SaaS companies, ARR is not a GAAP metric. So what happens is we've created a proxy for it called implied ARR, where the analyst community will take the last quarter growth in subscription revenue, but often they just do it against all revenue, and then multiply it by 4 and they get implied ARR. So it's just something to think about. ARR never really meant contractually recurring, which is why we have CARR. Okay. And originally, recurring revenue was just showing the contrast to perpetual license, where you only got the big upfront hit and then the 18% annual maintenance to 20%. Any questions so far? Helpful? Is it some of this is helpful to think about? Yes, Eric.
Well, quick question on, I would assume that under usage-based pricing, churn would be lower than that for subscription. Does your research show that?
It depends. So the question is, in usage-based pricing, is your churn lower? If you measure churn by logo, more often than not, yes. If you measure churn on ARR trends, the answer is it depends on macroeconomic conditions, et cetera, right? So as I showed you the growth rate, look at perfect example. Median NRR for public SaaS companies, 2 years ago, 120%. Datadog, 148%. I mean, hell, Snowflake had 168% net revenue retention because they were usage-based and it was going like that. But as soon as the macroeconomic conditions hit, their NRR at median went from 120 to 110%. In private SaaS companies, the median was 105% 3 years ago. It's anywhere between 99 and 101% based upon how you segment it. So retention is down, even at usage-based pricing companies. Okay. So why am I up here talking about the importance of how you calculate ARR? And I'm going to show you the recommended model we have going forward. So many of these efficiency metrics that your CFO and CEO are using are based upon your definition of ARR. Of course, ARR growth, and by the way, if you look at ARR growth, it's still the #1 metric that correlates to enterprise value to revenue multiples. Anyone who tells you it doesn't probably hasn't seen the data. In fact, the rule of X, has everyone heard about the rule of X? So the rule of X is a new metric that came out. Bessemer Ventures put it out. It's also backed up by Meritech Capital, the #1 public company, benchmarking company. Growth has a 2.4x higher correlation to revenue multiples than free cash flow margin or profit, EBITDA, operating profit. So growth matters. So the reason I highlight this, the ARR growth, your churn rate as measured by gross revenue retention, net revenue retention, CAC payback period. How many people know CAC payback period? So you're measuring for how much sales and marketing investment you spend to acquire new customer, and then the CAC payback says new customer associated ARR. And you'll see in just a minute, well, what's my new customer ARR in a usage-based model? In the old model, hey, they signed a $100,000 subscription contract. Well, we knew it was $100,000 for that client. If it's someone who's got a $10,000 platform access fee and pays $1 per usage variable, how in the hell do you know what the ARR is? You don't until 12 months after, and then you can look at it. So that's why these SaaS metrics, when you're doing usage-based pricing, your finance team is going to have to think about how does this impact our metrics. I already talked about implied ARR, and it's going to force a lot of companies to create a proxy for ARR. I have an idea, trailing 12 months revenue, right? Getting back to what was recognized as GAAP revenue. That's the ultimate truth, right? Now, some people are going to say, yeah, but you need to think about how much that new client's going to project forward, and we can do some level of predictability using forecasting on similar like company cohorts. You're going to want to do that, but trailing 12-month revenue is going to be a very important term for SaaS metrics and a usage-based model. Okay, I got 2 minutes left. Okay, so one thing to take back, if you're not a CFO, you could say, hey, I heard this, what do you think? Total ARR in the future is going to be based upon your subscription ARR, your contracted amount, plus the variable ARR. The subscription is going to be what's contractually committed. Your company may call it CARR. And then your variable is going to be whatever the unit of value is you're charging for times the per unit rate. You're going to want to calculate that both on a 3-month and 12-month trailing basis. So I'm going to go past this. I want to give you an example. Now, by the way, I violated every rule of presentation school that I ever went to by having a lot of detail here. The reason being, I kind of promoted this conference, and I had like 2,000 people that wanted the presentation afterwards. So if they don't get to hear the voiceover, I put a lot of detail. So please share this with your friends because there's a lot of data here. So let's give an example. You have a $10,000 platform subscription. That's one of the usage-based models. You pay for access to the application, and then you have a per unit. I just used $1 per unit. And I showed the 12-month ramp rate of the units consumed. So they consume 955 units over the first year, but you can see how that ramped up. But you can also see in month 12, it went down. It went from 200 to 125, if you can read that. We don't know why it went down. Could be seasonality. Could be they're not using it as much. But using the subscription ARR plus variable ARR, you get the 10,000 plus 955 for the last 12 months of usage, and your ARR is 10,955. Pretty easy to do, right? But look what happens if you do it on a monthly basis using MRR. On month 1, your ARR was 10,120. Month 11, it was 12,400. But month 12, it was 11,500. Your board and investors are going to say, what the hell's going on? Your ARR went down last month? How could that be? So that's why doing MRR times 12 as your ARR calculation can be very dangerous in a variable world. I'm doing it in year 2 here also. I'm even showing more variability. But think about this company that has a lot more usage at the beginning of the year than the end of the year. And there's almost a $4,000 difference between ARR, even at this low model. That's 25% difference, right? Think about your CFO when you say, oh yeah, ARR went down 25% this month. She's going to look at you and say, what the hell are you talking about? Okay. I'm going fast here because I've only got 5 minutes. Oh, good.
Couldn't you just do this on a rolling 12-month basis, right?
A trailing 12 months?
Rolling 12 months, right? So 12 months, and the 13th month is 13.
Yeah, to me, that's the same as a trailing 12 months.
Right.
Yeah, same. So that's what I'm recommending, by the way.
Yeah.
But your investors are going to know how you forecasting the next 12 months using the rolling 12 months. So historical reporting, yes. Forward-looking forecasting, you got to have some type of proxy, right? Something else. When you have usage-based pricing, you're going to have to get really good at understanding how long does it take to ramp a new customer. And by the way, the profile of that new customer, SMB versus enterprise, number of points of integration, it might be they ramp in 3 months, they ramp in 6 months. So you might want to think about breaking up your ARR from here's my ramp-up ARR, but at 6 months I know that most companies are fully ramped, and this is my expansion ARR. Why is this important? Because net revenue retention, the number 3 metric that correlates to enterprise value to revenue multiples, is based upon expansion. So if it takes 6 months to ramp a customer, maybe that's your new ARR. What's that revenue called month 7? Is that still new ARR? Or is that expansion ARR? And that fine little point says, does my NRR calculation start at month 7? Or does it start at month 13, and your CFO and CEO and investors will care about that? Okay, I'm not going to bore you with this. I'm not going to bore you with this. Snowflake is my poster child. I'm going to tell you a quick story about Snowflake. Snowflake, about 2.5 years ago, said, our net revenue retention is 165%, which says your existing customers are going to do 65% more revenue, or did 65% more revenue this period versus last period. Let's say it's fiscal year over fiscal year. Later in the call, the CFO said, we're going to grow 60% next quarter. And an analyst said, wait a minute, how can you have a net revenue retention of 165%, which says your existing customers are going to grow 65%, and your company's only growing 60%? And what it exposed was how they were calculating net revenue retention. And what they were doing at that point in time, where they're saying, today, let's say it's December 31st, 24, I'm going to look at all the customers we have today that were customers a year ago, and I'm going to look at the growth rate. By doing that, they inherently eliminated everyone who churned. So they got busted. So they went to this 2-year look back. And the 2-year look back for net revenue retention is a great metric for usage-based companies. The problem is it really delays, because what you do is you look at all the customers you had today, you look at how many of those were customers 13 to 24 months ago, and that's the 2-year look back. But you can't do a net revenue retention 2-year look back for 24 months, right? If you know what I'm saying, from they became a customer. So it's not great, but it's something as usage-based you might want to look at. Just go into the 10K for Snowflake and see how they define 2-year look back. A lot of usage-based pricing companies are using this as one way to report NRR. Okay. Summary and conclusion. So one way to calculate annual recurring revenue in your usage-based company is to split the baby. You have your subscription ARR, which is contractually committed. You have your variable ARR, which is from your variable pricing units, and you report both of those internally. And you know exactly how my contracted ARR is going, and you also can forecast how your variable ARR is going to be going, because that's going to be critical for your investors. So that's that. Spend is truth. To the gentleman who asked me the question back there, I believe that even though I love the fact that me and my friends can kind of say, okay, here's variable ARR, and we can pontificate and debate it. At the end of the day, spend is truth. GAAP revenue is truth. So we recommend for reporting purposes to investors, et cetera, that we use trailing 12 months, and that's what we build our metrics upon. And that's what we use to understand how our business is actually performing versus this concept of annual recurring revenue that you don't know for sure what it's going to be in the future. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and see if there's any last questions. Anybody have something they will take back to them? Yep.
So 2 years of layoffs, the whole approach was like seat-based to usage-based, right? Usage-based. Did you ever look at that in benchmarking where people went, hey, we have seats, we're going to have less revenue because people have laid off, we're not really sold, we're going to switch to usage? Did any of that prove out?
We didn't do the research to say, based upon FTE headcount reduction, what happened to those accounts that sold per seat. What we're seeing now with subscription-based, we see that their growth rate is declining faster than usage-based. So anecdotally, it appears that the reduction in headcount is driving reduced growth rates, but I don't have any empirical evidence for you. Okay. Last thing I'm going to do, our job at Benchmarkit is one thing, to research, try to analyze the data, and present the data back without too much of our own opinions. So SaaS Metrics Palooza, if you are interested in what's going on with usage-based pricing, Battery Ventures did a great research report. By the way, AI, the average Fortune 1000 companies identified 65 use cases for AI over the last 18 months. 5, on average, have been deployed. ROI, not measured for the most part. So you've heard that. So that's why you're seeing such a delay in a lot of the talk about ROI, because they haven't developed yet. That's why it's an experimental budget. But SaaS Metrics Palooza, the only reason I shared that with you, it's not a promotion because I've got 30 of the industry's top speakers that did 30-minute sessions. It's just good educational content, and there's like 5 sessions about usage-based pricing and variable-based pricing. Any other questions before I give up the stage?
Yeah, love the material here. Did you see anything in your research that showed any notable differences between big ticket ACV and small ACVs, like 100K spends versus $1,000 year spends?
So great questions. I hate benchmarks that aren't segmented based upon company profile attributes. So if you go to benchmarkit.ai/benchmarks, every one of our benchmarks you can filter by company size, by ACV, by pricing model, by distribution model, and target customer segment. It has to be. Never use benchmarks that are for a general population because they will mislead you. It's a great question. So any questions, anything, Ray at benchmarkit.ai. I love talking about this stuff, as you can imagine, from my energy here. So thank you so much.